What's up, physios? I have on the podcast today the amazing Greg Schaible. I had to work on pronouncing your last name a little bit before I got that. But you and I have known each other for a little bit. We had a conversation quite a while back about everything that you're doing, everything that I'm doing. So it's really awesome to catch up with you right now. You're the owner of On Track Physio, your CSCS. And of course, your claim to fame right now is that you are running Sports Rehab Expert, and that's your baby right now. Those are awesome, awesome endeavors, and I can't wait to get into those topics.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on, Jared. Looking forward to it. Been following your content for a while too, so happy to be on here and contributing to it.
Awesome. So where should we start, man? I think I'd like to start with like your origin. Essentially, the very beginnings for you. You've come a long way. We've all have, from where we started. And so where did you start that sort of led you along the pathway to get to where you are now? Because I think that a lot of the clinicians out there that listen to this podcast and that follow you, that follow me, they sort of look to see what we're doing now and as if they're going to try to like mimic it or replicate it, but they're not in the same stage, right? And so sometimes when we share our stories about where we came from, that's super helpful because then they can go, oh, okay, so that's the first step that they took. That's the second step rather than step number 9,662,
Yeah, 100%. It's kind of everybody's got a long story probably too, and I don't want to necessarily get too deep into it, but I think I got into the field for a lot of the similar reasons that other people did. Is they want to be involved with talking with people, kind of have an active job or active profession, and they just want to help people, or they had previous injuries. So my nickname in high school growing up, I was involved with a lot of sports, and my nickname was Injury Prone. So I was in the training.
First name injury,
room.
Last name prone.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was in the training room all the time, just dealing with injuries. And it wasn't until I started to, so I had a lot of experience with rehab. But it wasn't until I started contributing and doing a lot more in the weight room too, that I felt like my reduction in injury was kind of a lot less, and problems were mitigated and put away and resolved to a certain extent too. So I was always happy with what the rehab gave me, but I always found myself ending up in rehab or in the training room again too. And then when I found the weight room, that's when things started to kind of take a turn for the better. So that's why I've always enjoyed trying to figure out how to combine the best of both of them, because it's really helped me personally. My background kind of being involved with athletics is, I played football, basketball, and track in high school, but then I ended up running track in college. So my career I didn't know if I wanted to be a physical therapist or athletic trainer. I was kind of toying between the two of them.
Did you make the decision?
Through talking with athletic trainers in the training room when I was injured.
Okay.
They were talking more about the hours that they were kind of doing and, how you're...
What year was that decision? How long are we talking about?
I would say the first or second year. There was some things that kind of happened in there too. So I got cut from the team, track team that it was a Division I program where I was considered a preferred walk-on that I was going to go to. So I turned down some scholarship opportunities to try to run D1, because that was kind of, what everybody wants to do is they want to go D1, but they don't realize all the potential you can have at other schools and other universities. So
right.
There were some things that kind of happened in there with Title IX, with the ratios of numbers in the school, and they had to make some cuts. And the track team that isn't necessarily bringing in a lot of revenue for a university is going to get a lot of the cuts. So I don't blame anybody for this, but I got cut. And so I asked to transfer. So I went to a Division II program. And that whole process, it kind of started to make me really decide, okay, what am I actually trying to do after the fact of track? Right. So it was in that time frame where I was trying to make sure that I knew what I wanted to do while I was still doing what I loved to do.
So what year was that in?
Sophomore. Yeah. So
no, like 1990.
Oh God.
2000.
2008.
Okay. 2008.
Yeah.
So what was for you making the decision to become a physical therapist versus something else at that point in time? Fast forward to now, if you had to make that decision again, what decision would you make? Knowing the state of physical therapy now versus 2019, 2020 versus the state of physical therapy back then.
I'd still do it.
Still do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And
100%.
what led you to the decision that PT was a better profession for you than chiro or athletic training or anything else?
Part of it was the lifestyle that I was wanting to live. We probably will get into this, where a lot of people feel they're very trapped within the hours that they may be working for with a job. But as far as if you compare it to an athletic trainer, like athletic trainers, you're going to be working weekends, you're going to be working nights. And that wasn't necessarily, I love sports and I love being around sports. But I also wanted the freedom to go have fun with my friends and family, because those are big parts of my life. And that would hinder that a little bit. So that was a big decision of why I chose physical therapy over athletic training, was what I could do outside of the working hours and the days that I would be able to be a little bit more free for that. I know you can feel a little bit trapped within the hours that you are working and putting in a lot of hours as a physical therapist too. And I'm sure we'll talk about ways to kind of get out of that if people are looking for that. But I just feel like the opportunity to do that and become unique was a lot more available in the physical therapy world than the athletic training world.
So fast forward to your first job. Right before we hit record, you were telling me an interesting story about that you actually got canned in your first physical therapy job. Let's go ahead and quickly just share that story.
Yeah. So when I was in physical therapy school, I did my best to kind of set up rotations that I thought were going to be learning, because you always hear a lot of the learning and the specific things that you get into or happens outside of school. So I tried to set up some rotations that really interest me. So doing that, I got exposed to some different treatment methods that were out there. PRI, SFMA were probably the two big ones. I got exposed to some McKenzie methods and other things of that nature too. And when I interviewed for my first job, I was kind of blinded by the light a little bit that they were just developing the sports performance program too, and they wanted a PT overseeing that as well as doing rehab. So I didn't necessarily ask the questions that I needed to ask during that interview as far as how I would be able to practice. Mm-hmm. And this clinic was very much DiMaggio and McKenzie based as far as how they treat people. I was under the impression that I would be able to use an eclectic approach of a variety of different techniques if I saw it was fit for the patient. So I started doing that when I first started working. And the owner of the business came up to me and asked me what I was doing. So I told him, I gave him some reasoning. Mind you, this person was actually getting better too. And I even brought some research behind it, even though, if anybody's familiar with PRI, they know there's not like a lot of direct research out there, but there's some other things.
PRI, for those who don't know, is Postural Restoration Institute.
Yeah.
And they do a lot with, the restoration of the balance between the right and left halves of the body, very big into the diaphragm, that kind of stuff.
Yep. So anyways, the conversation, this first week into my first job, he pulled me into his office and he goes, I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. You need to just trust what I was telling you. I need a follower, not a leader. Those were the literal words he used to me. And I was, at that time, I really didn't say anything because I was just kind of struck and in shock and nervous at the same time. So I didn't really say anything, and I'm kind of a shy, reserved person to begin with. But so anyways, that we left the conversation, and I kind of knew right then, like, things are just not going to work here. And the next morning I come in, he pulls me into his office again. We're like parting ways at that point in time. So
is that before or after you showed him the research?
That was after. He didn't look at that. He didn't.
I'm sure. Yeah. I'm sure he took offense to it as a whole.
Yeah. And there's reason, like, I'm running a business. I have a little bit different perspective behind it now too, where like, I understand, like, he needs a continuum of care that is fairly repeatable for the type of business that he's running. So he wants that kind of thing. Whereas if I'm doing all these different things and the person has to get passed off to somebody else, that's not necessarily an efficient point of care. So looking at it now, I kind of understand what he was getting at. He didn't approach it in a very kosher way, in my opinion.
So what lesson did you learn in that moment, moving forward, moving into your next job and the next, process of
Yeah, it's getting clear of how you want to practice yourself and being able to tease that out in an interview. That could be financial wise, that could be hour wise, that could be how you practice and treat people wise, whether you're with people one-on-one or passing off to a PTA in tech. Like you have to be very direct in what you want, and that has to come up in the conversation with the interview to know if you're going to be a good fit for that place or not.
I feel like a lot of young therapists are sometimes apprehensive or afraid to ask those questions because it'll make them seem like they're not a good candidate. And, a lot of them don't even maybe know what they're calling. I'm not a believer in a style. I believe in no style is the best style. You have to adapt what you do to the patient, but nonetheless, like they haven't even attested enough things to really know yet. They don't know what they're getting into, if you will. But I think the bigger issue is maybe just the apprehension about not getting the job because you're speaking your mind or because you're, telling the potential employer what your preferences are when you're supposed to just, like you said, just follow suit.
Yeah, it's tough. You don't know what you don't know. And sometimes you have to go through experiences to learn. Whereas, you could look at it from a clinical perspective now. A big problem that I see with the profession is just everybody looking at 30-second clips on Instagram, and all of a sudden they know what they're doing in the treatment room, but they never experienced it personally.
The issue is when, of course, you get people that say, look, the end all be all is this exercise or this exercise in a 30-second clip. And then you end up with this try this out on Monday scenario where the therapist just goes, oh, that's cool. And let me just try this out on Sally. And of course, there's no real clinical reasoning or anything behind it. But it is problematic.
But to a certain extent, you could use that exercise and fail flat on your face, and then you learn from it. So you have to experience, you have to operate at the edge of your capabilities too, and you have to learn from it. So you have to be able to self-reflect too. So it all comes back to, and where you want to, what I wanted to do coming out of PT school is very different for what my goals are now. Like you change as a person as you become older, as you grow, and what you want to do at that particular point in time is going to be different 5 years down the road. And that doesn't necessarily mean what you want to do then was bad, because it led you to where you are now. I could have looked at all these experiences that I had where things didn't go well, and looked at them as a failure, but really they just led me to where I'm at now. So sometimes it's being okay with what happened and just learn how to move forward from that. And that doesn't necessarily give somebody an answer of what to do in an interview.
Right.
But hopefully that gives you more self-confidence and more reassurance that, if things don't turn out all right, it's still going to be okay. So, have the confidence to say something or ask a question that you might not have been felt apprehensive asking beforehand.
Right. Whether you get fired or quit, if it wasn't the right place for you, it wasn't the right place for you. It doesn't freaking matter how you ended up leaving. But take us one step further, right? So we were talking about how you had a difficult time transitioning from working in a clinic to what you're doing now. So just briefly, real quick, just share what your clinic looks like now, what your environment looks like, where you're at, if you're inside of a gym or if you have your own space, how many people you got working with you. And so we know where you are today. And then let's talk about the journey to get there. What worked, what didn't work, what were your struggles?
Yeah. So currently right now, I'm the owner of On Track Physiotherapy, which is just an individual cash pay clinic. 4 months ago, I hired my first part-time employee, and she's a PTA. She's she's a PTA too, who is going to finish her. She's in a transitional PT program. Okay. So very small, dipping my toes into hiring somebody at this point in time. But otherwise, just an individual practice that has been around for 4 years. But I started the first 2 years being just part-time. And again, dipping my toes into it as I
Let me go back to that in 1 second. I want to just pause for 1 second on the person that you're hiring, right? Yeah. So in the cash-based environment, one of the things that I noticed, I literally have struggled with this all morning because I'm on the second floor right now. Downstairs is my clinic. I'm not working today. It's Friday. I don't work on Fridays. I have practitioners down there who are working for me. Yet I've had 2 or 3 patients already come in the door today that have asked to see me because they know I'm in the building. And one guy was actually like, I have to see Dr. Cooper. I'm not going to do anything till I see it. So I had to like go downstairs. But we run into that when we're the sort of like the guy, we're the dude, you know, we're the woman, we're the whatever, we're the guru, we're the person.
Yeah.
And, you know, and we become known as that person in our community. And then we bring on somebody else who's very qualified, very capable. But then the public hears about us from their doctor, from a friend, whatever. They come in, and then we have to transition them very gently over to another practitioner. So what are the plans for you for integrating this new hire into your cash-based practice? Are they going to see their own patients? Are they going to be just doing a secondary treatment, like you work on them a bit, they work on a bit? How do you plan on arranging that? And what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So part of that is how you frame the whole situation. So back when I was the only person in the company, I did a poor job of framing that there might be anybody else working with them in the future. So anybody who was with me in the past, like, this is just not going to happen. Like, they're seeing me, and that's just the way it's going to be. Because I didn't do a very good job of framing that from the start, and develop the relationship with them, and they're comfortable in that relationship. So anybody moving forward, it was changing how I operated and how that system worked. The unique part about this being in the PTA is I just used it from a standpoint of almost taking it as she's on a clinic rotation. So I do the evaluation, which is what you got to do anyways. And we know kind of going in beforehand, based upon the form and their intake and what they've told us about their issue, if this might be an appropriate thing for her to follow up with. So if I think it's going to be something appropriate for her, I have her come in on that evaluation. We kind of go over it together, and it's framed from the start that Morgan is her name, is very capable of doing this treatment, and she's going to be the one following up from you. If there's ever a need where I need to become involved, that's perfectly fine. But she knows what she's doing. She's treated a lot of these in the past, and it's almost just giving and talking the person up to allow them to be comfortable that this is going to be the solution for them. So it's that framing that happens beforehand.
Is the goal for Morgan to have her own schedule or work alongside you?
Yeah, have her own schedule. And then eventually the goal is, when she becomes a PT, that this is a capable thing for her to be doing full time out of school. It's going to take work from my end, but also take work from her end too, which is it's a nice feeler. Again, she was the one who reached out to me, which I liked that person taking the initiative. And I was in the phase of where I was thinking about this, but I wasn't necessarily quite ready for it. And I was like, this can't be a better opportunity to kind of feel this out. Like, this isn't going to come around again. So this is probably the easiest way to kind of start merging towards that direction, if that's the direction that I want to go. So I took the opportunity and went with it, and we're figuring it out kind of as we go too. So
that's awesome. Are you guys doing salary, or are you doing per hour?
Yeah, so it's per hour based upon how many people she sees. So there's actually a base salary that goes with it, but with incentives that kind of go along there.
Okay, cool. So that's where you are today, and then rewind to you're working somewhere. Where are you working? What are you doing? And then how did you get, I'm going to put air quotes around it, how'd you get out?
Yeah, so I was working for a big company. That was the job that I got after being fired. So I went back because I knew I worked as a tech actually while I was going to PT school. So I knew the owner of the practice, or the facility manager of the practice. So I was just asked them if they were willing to hire somebody at that point in time. So that's where I started working afterwards. Worked there for 4 years, somewhere around that time frame. But for 2 years of that time, I started part-time seeing people on days that I was not working, and I saw them. I had a 40-minute commute to work, and then I lived closer towards Ann Arbor, which would, if you look at the time distance, is an hour, so we're not competing in any way. So I did things part-time on Tuesdays and Saturdays were the days that I was working for myself, trying to see if this was a feasible thing to kind of build up, and reached a point where it grew. My ideal scenario was that I reached half my salary before I was going to quit, but realistically that didn't actually happen.
Okay.
So someone gave me the advice, and I've said this multiple times on my website and to other podcasts too, but you don't have the ability to grow if you don't have the capacity to grow. And
okay. I like that.
100% sense to me, because I'm seeing people on Tuesday afternoons, evenings, and Saturdays. Like, there's just very little time for me to try to build a practice or try to fit people in, because Tuesdays and Saturdays don't always work for people too. So how are you going to grow something if you can't become available?
What was your space? What was the actual physical space you were working out of at that time?
So I still am in a gym. So I independently contract space inside of a gym where I can use their equipment, and then I have a private treatment room that I'm sitting in right now talking with you.
Okay, cool. And that's how you started. That's essentially where you when you were working for somebody else and you had your side hustle. This was your side hustle where you're at now.
Yep.
So what was the toughest challenge about getting out, and then what happened once you pulled the trigger and you went independent? What was that struggle like?
Getting out of your comfort zone was the biggest thing. Like, you have a known paycheck coming into you every single week, and that's nice. It's simple. It's reassuring. Like, there's those things. It's impossible to get over unless your desire for something different is greater. And until you reach that point, you're not going to make a decision. And that's where I was. And that's where I was for 2 years. Now, saying that, I was glad that I kind of dipped my toe into it that way, and kind of gradually, because when I eventually did make the move, things built up pretty darn quickly. Who knows if it would have happened sooner, if I made the decision sooner.
What was the primary method at which you acquired new patients early on, before you had an established practice?
Yeah. So 2 years of doing part-time, what that allowed me to do was get a really good relationship with the current gym that I was at. So I could pull patients from there.
So 2 years was the amount of time that you did a side hustle before you went full-time with what you're doing now?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yep. And then it also allowed me time to kind of play around with my website and do some blog posts, do some videos and different things like that to start ranking higher and being seen, and also getting Google reviews to be present, and that start to just accumulate and start showing up on search engine results. So that time frame was helpful from that standpoint. Then when I did make the move, it was setting up relationships that I just didn't have the time to develop further, because maybe I had heard of somebody or reached out to somebody in the past, but didn't have the time to kind of go meet with them, talk with them, or help them out or do a workshop. So that workshops were the biggest thing. It was just going around to different gyms, studios, running stores, and doing different talks like that to just start getting my name out there more.
What were the topics? What did you find most successful in your workshops about with regards to getting people converted? Because I've done a ton of those as well.
Yeah.
And some of them, I did one not too long ago to running store, which was fantastic. The problem is runners, if they're relatively healthy, I can sell them on a running analysis. Maybe they got a little acre of pain here, but they don't really turn in to long-term customers because they're okay. Like, they don't have a huge problem. But then, you do something else where you attract the person who's the right customer for you. The workshop does a little bit better. And so we've had mixed success. We're dialed in pretty good now. We know exactly what we need to do on our end to have a high converting workshop. But for you, in the niche that you're in, what worked and what didn't work?
Yeah. So it was the same way. Mixed results with it. Wasn't one thing that's particularly worked better than others. Low back, shoulder, and hip were probably the most common ones that I did and got patients from. And my mindset towards the end of the workshops were just to pretty much, start wide with who you're talking to. And as you start looking at the audience and start seeing people's responses or people's nodding or people paying attention or not paying attention, you can see who's really digging it and who's not. And you can talk directly to them and start tailoring your presentation more and more to their problems. So I would ask questions to the audience of things that people were dealing with, or have people come up as volunteers to kind of show some things. And then you start finding one or two people that you're really talking to who need you. And that's who you focus on. And that's all that I was really hoping to get out of a lot of them, were 1 to 2 people, and then another
Sure.
10 people who just knew my name. And if something ever came up, they might think about me. So that was how it started. I also toyed around with some different member appreciation days that I would do at gyms. So that was just kind of doing like real quick spot treatments to people, and got a lot of email addresses that way to get on a newsletter to potentially help in the future. And then also just, again, FaceTime recognition. And some of them turned into more of like a maintenance type of a wellness program too, which is I have the, you're injured, we need to have a specific rehab program to,
Yep.
There's really nothing going on, but you still want to keep operating at the highest level of your capabilities. So we try to serve both people that way.
Did you participate in the advertising of those workshops, or was the advertising, did you rely on the host?
Relied on the host a lot with that, yeah. So I would go to the extent of giving flyers and bulletin board material, and what I would talk about, and help them like write an email, or do like a Facebook Live or something like that with the owner to kind of give some people a background of what we're going to be talking about. But ultimately it went out there to their audience. So their audience was the biggest help in that regard there too. So people are very protective over that too. So your relationship with somebody has to go slowly. And I ran into a lot of problems too, being part of a gym, trying to go to a different gym. People are worried that you're going to steal people and they're going to end up at that gym. So I didn't necessarily think about that when I was first starting doing it. So your way of approaching it has to 100% be how you're going to help their audience, their community out. And it is never about you.
When you eventually decided to pull the trigger and go out on your own, what were those first couple of months like?
You don't realize how much time there is in a day, or how much free time there is, until you aren't treating people for 40 hours. Sometimes it's just wondering like, okay, what am I going to do now? And start to overanalyze things a lot too. And you don't really, you change things up too much, you don't really know what's working or not working. Sometimes you just got to let it play out and see how it goes. So that, a lot of anxiety that kind of goes with that. But again, I think the 2 years that led up to that helped me build it a lot quicker. And there wasn't a large time period where I was like really, really concerned. There was obvious ups and downs with the months, but things got rolling fairly quick to get at a somewhat comfortable pace. But again, I contribute that a lot to what I was doing the 2 years before that too.
Right. And then as a cash-based practice, right, when you first started out, it was just you, right? No front desk, no aide, nothing. You're doing everything. How did you manage that? And with your documentation, did you end up using an EMR? With your scheduling, did you use a software, or was it just old school on your phone and taking checks from people? Like how advanced were you when you began? And then how did you sort of like, what have you changed over time that has helped you to smooth out your practice?
Yeah. Initially I just did, through my email, I signed up for the whole G Suite thing, where you could get to do your EMR there and have it HIPAA compliance. So I started with that, and used a scheduling system involved with that. So just on the Google Calendar. And then I used Square for processing card payments. And that was literally it. After I went full time, now I'm using IntakeQ as a scheduling system. CardPoint actually is a processing system. I like it better. Square may have changed, but at that point in time, I could not set up a payment plan. So I went with CardPoint so I could start doing payment plans. Square might be changed now. I'm not sure, but the scheduling system's really nice, where I can get text reminders and I can have them fill out an online intake form. I can do my documentation on that. So it's a nice all-inclusive with a low overhead for just an individual practitioner. So
for those that are listening, that was Intake Q was the essentially the software that lets you do intakes, it lets you do scheduling, the text reminders and everything. And you switched from Square over to what was that?
CardPoint.
CardPoint. Okay. And you have a local card swiper that you use in the practice and whatnot.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And you're doing payment plans. I mean, I hear some people doing them, some people are not doing them. Paul Goff, which is, as far as the business side, he's a guy that I follow a lot and I've had on the show as well. He's huge into payment plans. How do you utilize them in your practice? Do you offer them up front? Do you only offer them when somebody gives you some pushback with regards to payment? And then is that for your physical therapy services, your wellness, or is that for both?
Most people choose it for the physical therapy service because it's more expensive. So you have a different price for your PT and your wellness? Yes. Yeah. So the wellness, most of the time I'm seeing people for a half hour, whereas PT, I'm seeing people for an hour. So it's priced accordingly with that. Okay. So those hour sessions, if you start to get into a bigger package where you need visits to get somebody better, then the price starts going up and up and up, and they start seeing a large number and people start freaking out about it. So that's where the packages tend to come into play. So I talk to people on a per session basis, as opposed to like the sum of the whole treatment package or plan of care. And then talking about them on a per session basis, and then let them know there are payment plans available if you choose to use one. People usually break it up into 3 months or 6 months is what I say. And I give people the option. So some people are like, oh, that's awesome, thank you so much for doing that. And then other people are like, let's just get it done and over with right now. So it really depends on the person. I think giving them an option is the best thing for you.
Let's transition into now the Sports Rehab Expert. And that is essentially the education platform. How did you get into that? How did you get involved in Sports Rehab Expert and have that be something that is now under your wing?
Yeah, so I mentioned him earlier. His name is Joe Heiler. He's actually the founder of Sports Rehab Expert. He started that back in 2007. Was the website initially. So I found him through Sports Rehab Expert and just realized he was pretty much in my backyard. I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan. He's in Traverse City, Michigan, which is about 3 hours difference, but still Michigan. So I was still like, cold. It's still cold. It was in the summer that I went up there. So it's beautiful in the summer there. If people get a chance, it's awesome up there in the summer.
I actually spent the summer in Ann Arbor when I was in high school. I did one of those things where you're a high school student, you go and you take classes in a college during the summer. So I went to U of M for a summer. It is beautiful.
Okay. Yeah.
In the summer.
Yeah. So I was like, I got to reach out to him to see if I did my final rotation there. So, when I was at his clinic, he at that point in time was just transitioning into his own clinic as opposed to working for somebody too. So he was kind of in the process of growing his clinic when I was up there. So during that time, he was also obviously running the Sports Rehab Expert website, and I would help him shoot the videos, kind of do some blog posts, do case studies, and do different things like that. And then just kind of started to help him after I graduated and started working, doing pretty much like contract work. So I would occasionally put together a blog post or a case study or help him with the website kind of a thing. So I stay connected with them, and not to mention just like for the mentorship aspect of like having help developing professionally too. So was able to kind of stay with them, and then his clinic had gotten to the point where it just got really, really busy and had started hiring a lot of other people that were involved with the clinic, and his kids were getting older too, where they were, just starting to get into high school or graduating high school into college. So he wanted to spend more time with family. And he couldn't give the site the necessary time it needed. Plus this would have been around like 2015 now. So a lot more people have a similar, online space now, where he was kind of one of the first to market. So it was really big initially. And then as he started spending less and less time with it, it started to nosedive a decent amount to where it wasn't worth his time anymore. So he was, so I pay him. So he was kind enough to ask me, he's like, this just isn't worth my time anymore. It's not bringing me that much revenue at this point in time, but it still has potential if you want to take it over. So he handed me the keys. I pay him a royalty is how it works. But it really, I mean, things for that site were pretty, it was nice because there's things were created, but what it actually was, it was pretty low level compared to some of the other people that you'll see in the online space. So
Right.
there was a learning curve of picking up what he already had and then trying to now grow an online business, which is different than trying to grow a brick and mortar business. And now there's two things that are going on simultaneously, where I started my own practice because that's what I wanted to do. And then now this other opportunity came in and I'm like, this is awesome. I would love to do this. And now I got two things that are competing for time. And it's kind of like, where do I spend my time? What do I do? And that led to its own set of issues too. And learning curves that were separate from one another.
For those that follow me, they know that I'm sort of in the similar boat as you are, which is I have a brick and mortar and I have an online platform. And either of those two things could be a full-time job for sure. And, you see people out there that are doing this and you're like, oh, wow, look how they're doing. It's like, no, it's a lot of hours and it's a lot of work. It is definitely not easy to do. So I empathize with you having to do that. What have you, what would you say for Sports Rehab Expert? Like who's the actual target customer? Like who's the perfect person to go and get value from that platform?
Yes. I mean, the intent of Sports Rehab Expert is to, number one, help you with sports rehab education. I mean, that's the name of it. But I think a lot of people view sports rehab as just for athletes, and they don't necessarily see how they can start combining it with everyday patients that they see. And there's a lot of, and that's based upon progressions, regressions, and how you frame everything. But as far as exercise and where you're trying to develop them to, or what the individual is trying to get back to. But nonetheless, there's still a gap there between performance, and performance for an athlete can also still be performance for an 80-year-old who's just trying to play, play with their grandchildren and play, kickball or something like that, and try to throw them the ball. The performance is all relative. And just like what you can do in the treatment, it's all relative to the person. So it's trying to show them how they can bridge the gap and make sports rehab training more repeatable and through a wide variety of populations that you would see in the orthopedic world. And then get that education from a standpoint of very open and without having to. So the thing that I have a beef with is you go through all this schooling and then all of a sudden people want you to go take residencies or fellowships and spend all this time away from your family or take pay cuts and things like that. And you already went to school, but all this stuff with technology and being available online, like you don't need to go do that. You don't need to sacrifice your development and getting your current experience. You can still get that education in other places too. So try to shore it up in a very particular manner. That's, like you said, we talked about earlier, having systems in place to allow you to do that without necessarily having to spend the big lump of money or spending time away from family and friends and doing all these requirements that are for these fellowships and residencies. So giving that type of sports rehab education in a very digestible process and showing them how they can mimic that in the orthopedic world, where a lot of us spend our time treating general population.
That's awesome. So there's two pieces in there that really caught my ear. The first one was this idea of treating everyone like an athlete, whether they have the actual like label on them or not, treating grandma like an athlete, just at least understanding that the drills and the techniques and the strategies that you would use for an athlete can just be scaled down because human movement is human movement. And so what you're saying is that on that site, it's not just for people who work with athletes, but people who want to work with people in a way that like their athletes. Did I hear that right? Yeah.
I mean, let me give you one example. So a plyo step where someone's trying to change directions in sport, where they might be moving, straight at you, moving forward, and then having to turn into lateral, how they might change positioning of their foot, reposition the foot, and create a plyometric action or a dynamic action, a force into the ground to go in the opposite direction. that's also, and obviously you got to scale this way back, but can be translated into fall prevention too, because the individual being able to reposition their foot is a big problem for why people have falls. So, you're still doing sports. The concept is still similar. You're just trying to figure out how to scale it appropriately to the individual.
That is funny that you say that, because I was just working with a gentleman yesterday that had a mild stroke, and I was literally doing agility work with him like I would. And I even explained to him, I was like, look, this is exactly what I have football players do. It's no different. You're just doing the slow baby version, but it's the same drill. I mean, like it's the same footwork drill that you'd give to anybody. It's just different speed.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty cool. The second thing that you mentioned, which I thought was interesting, was this idea of residency and fellowship, and how people are almost, I'm going to use the term, guilted when they graduate from physical therapy school to move into that arena and like go and do a residency. And I remember when I graduated from USC, essentially the same month, just about, that I graduated, my wife gave birth to our son. And we were in California at the time, and I'm a New Yorker, and she was from Jersey, and she literally looked at me and she was like, because they wanted me to do a residency at USC. She looked at me and was like, you are not doing a residency. She goes, I have sacrificed enough. We are going back to the East Coast because, we were having a kid and our family's over here, whatnot.
Yeah.
And I didn't even fight her on it. I was like, okay, I get it. And it's not even really something I necessarily wanted to do anyway, simply because it was just more structured schooling. And you're right. There's so much that you can learn if you have a very organized way of doing it. And all of the lectures and all the things that people are learning in residency, that content is out there. You just have to know where to find it, and you have to be diligent enough to look for it. And I don't know if I could say for sure that therapists that I've interviewed that have done a residency are tremendously outperforming those that just learned independently. And I have always been really a self-learner. I was self-taught as a trainer gazillion years ago, and I continue to self-teach, as do you. And there's just so much that you can gain. So if you are a new grad and you're trying to wonder, should I do a residency, should I not? It's right for some people, but if you don't do it, it's okay. You can still get to a super high level, and like Greg is here, and get there without having to go through that structured learning experience. But you have to know where to get the information. You have to be diligent enough to go after it.
Yep, 100%. Awesome.
Let's just transition real quick, and then we'll wrap up into working with athletes, like actual athletes, not grandma athletes. Talking about professionals and semi-professionals, that kind of group.
Yeah.
First of all, do you like working with that population, the pros, the higher level athletes? Because I have always, ever since I was a trainer, 20 plus years ago, I was always like, I don't love working with really high level people, because the psychological demand that they have and the external demand that they have to perform, and the coaches are telling them something. There's just a lot of different things. And I like working with weekend warriors. I like working with, like, quote unquote, the everyday athlete. That to me is just the kind of population that I vibe with. And I've worked with some professionals. I work with some of the guys on the Jets, and it doesn't excite me like it excites other people, right? I mean, you could I work with the Jets, but they're just people. And a lot of the times they're more challenging to deal with schedule wise, they're just sometimes challenging to deal with. So what's been your experience working with athletes? And I don't mean the everyday athlete. I mean the professional athletes, super high level people that are getting paid a lot for what they do. And it's your responsibility to get them back on the field as quickly as possible, with as few hiccups as possible.
Yeah, it's stressful. It's stressful for anybody who's dealing with an injury, but there's a lot of voices that go into an athlete's head as far as differences in opinion, what should be done, what shouldn't be done, what's considered right, what's considered wrong. And there's a lot of money on the line too with all of this as well. So it's hard. What it comes down to is you actually learn a lot of the soft skills of being able to communicate with people. And sometimes it feels like if you're good at doing that, you can almost do sports like rehab at the highest level there, almost better than somebody else who can't communicate, because you have to find what's driving that. individual, but that would happen in any scenario, because people need motivating factors, but they also need to know that you care and that you can give them an outcome. So it's being able to show all of that and being able to do it in a confident way, because they can see right through your confidence, because that's what they're trained to do. Like if someone's not confident guarding them, they're going to take them and pick them apart. So if you're not confident dealing with them, they're going to know that right away too. So you have to have confidence in it. And then you also, again, the communication aspect of it, I can't stress it enough. You are 100% right though, where sometimes, I mean, if this person is like after surgery, they're going to be a little bit more able to kind of come into you because they're not playing. But if they're still playing, now there's a high demand here, and you got to figure out a way to keep them playing. And then the hours that they need to be seen are very random too, and on a whim of notice. And sometimes the situation isn't the best with travel, games being played, and that hinders the ability for somebody to improve potentially too, where they're not getting the type of rest or rehab that they necessarily need all the time. So there's a lot of factors that go into it, and it's being nimble, being able to be nimble and adjust too on the fly is really important with that as well.
You mentioned soft skills. What is the number one soft skill that you think a new grad or a young therapist needs to get really, really good at to work with athletes, and then beyond that?
Listening, number one, and then being able to communicate in a short period of time and not ramble. I probably seem like I've rambled a little bit on the podcast.
Where did you get number two? So what led you to that conclusion?
So a lot of athletes don't love training. Nobody really loves rehab to a certain extent. The more you can seem like training, the more fun they have usually. But there's a lot of athletes that just love to play their sport and could care less about what they do in the gym. A lot of personal trainers, strength coaches, because they love training, they try to enforce that upon the athlete. But the athlete loves their sport. They don't necessarily love training. Some of them do, but not everybody loves the act of having to go in and strength train and perform all this work. So you have to understand who that athlete is. And sometimes they just want the minimum effective dose, man. What's going to get me better? What's going to get me back on the field? Because I really don't want to be here. And you can't take that at heart, but you have to understand that.
So when it comes to not rambling, tie those two together, right?
Yeah. So I went to number three.
You rambled. No, I'm just kidding.
My bad. I tried to make So with that, again, if they don't necessarily want to be there, then you have to get to the point quickly, and they have to know why it's helpful for them, how it's going to get them better. And that's really all that they care about. If you're starting to add a lot of this extra fluff to them, you're going to lose it quickly, because the name of the game in a lot of sports is speed, both on the court and then outside of the court when you're trying to get back to playing. So if you don't communicate that well, they're not going to have the confidence in you. So being able to communicate that quickly shows off your confidence.
How important is it for a therapist to either have played or coached, or to some degree have an actual experience with the sport that the athlete that they're rehabbing performs?
Yeah, it's super helpful. Like I can talk to a track person just like that. It comes so natural, and act of playing football and basketball and loving those two sports too. Like it's very easy. Baseball on another extent, I did play baseball, but it wasn't, like a top sport. But you still know the drivers of an athlete, and you know how to talk about sports too. So there's some common ground there. It's about knowing what the demands are of that sport, and then applying that to the rehab specifically into those demands so that they relate with one another. The more specific you can be to the task, the better off you're going to be. So sometimes it does take you watching games or watching film, or I'll often have athletes, bring in videos and tell me, show me what you're doing when there's pain or something like that. Just like that would be very useful if someone has pain with a squat. Like you'd want to see them squat. I would want to see them throw, and then you can start picking up things when you watch them if you just have an understanding of biomechanics too. So that's probably the biggest thing with sports rehab is how much biomechanics probably play a role into it as you get in higher and higher speeds, because higher and higher forces are starting to come on. So whereas with your grandma, how she accomplishes that task, it may not make that big of a difference. It certainly makes a difference when you're moving at high speeds, high velocity, and a lot of force is being placed on it.
How specific in your mind do you need to really get with an athlete? When I say specific, I mean sports specific.
So it's yeah, I know this question 100% because I talk about it. So it's joint angles and positions of the body. It is not about doing external rotation with a baseball in your hand and calling that sports specific, or just putting a football in their hand and having them go through a ladder and doing agility drills with a football in their hand or a lacrosse stick in their hand. That's not sports specific.
You knew what I was asking before I even.
Yeah. This is right on my alley, man. It's about the angles that the body needs to get into to accomplish a task at a high level.
Can you expound on that a little bit? When you say the angles that the body needs to get into, so are you talking about breaking down movement to its fundamental components and then understanding that this athlete needs these movement patterns or these movement and then training those things?
The easiest example is dynamic knee valgus, where a lot of us just want to see somebody jump off of a box and land on 2 feet, controlling their knee position. Or just jump vertically and land back on their feet, controlling knee position. But in sports, you're never standing still. So there's always a horizontal movement or a lateral movement involved with a vertical movement. So there's these dynamics that happen in how your body is able to shift foot placement. It puts you actually into valgus a lot of times, where you have to be able to go in and out of valgus competently at a high speed to be able to control the vectors that your body is moving in. Because sport is not played in a box. You can't just jump up and down and say that you're going to be ready to go for sport. Sport is played in a court, a field, a wide open environment where you're moving horizontally, you're moving forward and backward, side to side, or at an angle, and then all of a sudden you have to jump and create a different movement too. So that is a skill in and of itself. And going back to sports specific, it's knowing the positions of the body that are advantageous to accomplish that task. Because if I told someone to run forward, run backwards, shuffle left, shuffle right, they could accomplish that anyway. They could still accomplish it. It doesn't mean they did it efficiently or they did it well or to the best of their capabilities. So it's knowing how to pinpoint that in their movement pattern and showing them what to do and how to teach them to do it better, which is interesting because at a high speed, it's very hard to teach specifics. It goes into being very specific with cues and, again, not giving them too much information, be very pinpoint on one thing to focus on.
When you do your exams and when you do your return to sport criteria, are you choosing different movement patterns to analyze, whether that's running, cutting, sprinting, jumping, depending on the sport? Or are you looking for the basic human patterns that are present in all sports before you start to get too specific with your analyses?
Yeah, sport, the higher and higher, the closer and closer we get to return to play, the more and more I want it is specific to their sport. And ideally, if you have a relationship with a sport coach or a positional coach where you can talk them through drills that they've already been doing, and then see them do the drills that they would normally do in practice, that's about as specific as you can get there.
Yeah.
As opposed to in the rehab room, there's probably just more of general qualities that I'm looking at from a standpoint of what should all athletes be capable of doing. And then we would want to try to apply, okay, these are specific practice drills that you would do in practice. Let's try to mimic them in the clinic if we can, or can you get me video, or can I talk to a coach about how you do them and what does it look like? And how do you feel when you do them too? So that would be kind of the next level, which is not always easily done in a clinic. Right.
It sounds like there's a lot. I know when I work with athletes, a lot of times I work with a high school athlete or a college athlete, and there's a lot of communication that goes on, particularly at that young age with the parents. And then there's communication with the coach, and there's communication with their physician or the athletic trainer. It's a lot more work in many ways than just working with somebody that has a non-sport injury where there's no other team players trying to, like you said, there's so many voices in the athlete's head. And there's a lot of, like you said, soft skills involved in managing this kind of person. And it's not just soft skills managing the actual patient. It's also soft skills managing that patient's parents who are trying to get that kid a scholarship, or that patient's coach who you call up who's not really receptive to necessarily hearing your thoughts. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's the suggestion I give to a lot of people is you're going to run into a lot of external factors that are going to limit your ability to put this type of specificity into play. So keep trying, but do it once, document it, figure out what you did, and then figure out how to make that reproducible. So a lot of that involves sheets that are handouts that I give to people. And, if you don't have the space inside the gym, like, this is what you're doing at home, and I want you, next session you're coming back into, or you're going to be reporting on how you did with that. Or take a video. Everybody's got a phone these days. You can take a video of how somebody does with that outside of it too. So there's other ways of doing it, even if the parents or the coaches aren't necessarily as involved as it, or easy communication, lines of communication. There's other ways of going about doing it, but if you do it well once and document it, you can kind of figure out where to go from there, and make it reproducible no matter what the communication lines.
You're creating templates.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So if anybody wants to learn more about working with athletes, about getting into sports-specific rehabilitation, what's their first step with the content that you deliver?
Yeah, first step, the website Sports Rehab Expert has a lot of free information on there. We also have a free Facebook group that people can just get familiar with the activities. But probably the best route is there's a 5-day trial for Sports Rehab Expert, the membership site, and that's the easiest way to just get familiar with the content. We're actually in the process of working on getting CEUs available for just being a member. So you're going to get like about a 16-hour or 16 contact hours for, most of that probably would cost you around $300 to get elsewhere, where a membership cost, again, it's just $1 to try for 5 days, but then a year's cost just $97. So that's the easiest place to get started. There are more in-depth courses and things where we go into the real specifics and getting into a system. But as far as just having an encyclopedia of everything that we're capable of helping you out with, that's the best area to get started with there.
That's awesome, Greg. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate your time, bro.